Hey guys, today I'm going to go over some of the pros and cons of growing in raised beds. Now, people that watch my channel know that I have a lot of raised beds on my property, but I also do grow in the ground directly, and each has its advantages and disadvantages. Now, I'm going to talk about the advantages first. Okay, so number one, accessibility. For people who have health challenges like bad backs and whatnot, they can't always bend down to the ground or squat or bend over, and so putting things in raised beds makes it easy for them to get to. For instance, this bed here being about 3 feet off the ground, it's easy for anybody to be able to pick this lettuce here or the kale and whatnot. And so that's the number one reason I think that a lot of people will grow in raised beds is accessibility. Okay, number two, believe it or not, is looks. I've had a lot of people ask me to help them build raised beds because they think they look cool. We'll take and build these cedar boxes and whatnot, and they put them around their yard, and they think it looks a lot nicer than just taking and shoving stuff in the ground. And sometimes I have to agree. Okay, so number three, they're not permanent. If you live in an area where you don't want to dig in the ground or you can't, for instance, if you're renting and the owners don't want you to dig or plant in the ground, then this is a great alternative because you can plant in the boxes, and if you move, you can just take the boxes apart, haul the dirt off, or give the plant away, and you're good to go. Number four, the ability to plant over bad soil. Now, what I mean by bad soil, I don't mean contaminated soil. That's another story in itself. But by bad soil, I mean if you don't want to take the time to mulch it and whatnot and create a good soil over a period of time, you want to plant right away, you can put raised beds over top of like granite and whatnot and fill it with compost, and you're growing right away that season. So that's number four, is being able to grow over bad soil. And number five, containing invasive plants. And what I mean by that is any plant that will, if grown into the ground, will take off by itself and spread like wildfire, and then you can't contain it. A good example of that is mint. I've had mint like just go like a wildfire and just keep on going, and you can't contain it. Kind of like wild blackberries do, you know, you just can't contain them. So I think that's a real big reason why I do a lot of planting in raised beds. So though I believe those are the 5 reasons that people will grow in raised beds. Now let me give you 5 reasons why it's not always a great idea. Number one, it's more easily affected by heat and cold. In other words, when you're growing in raised beds, you don't have a buffer zone. You don't have an insulation of dirt or soil around it. So in the summertime, the soil or compost will dry out a lot quicker. You'll have to water a lot more. It will also heat up a lot more in the spring. Sometimes that can be a benefit, but for the most part, it's really hard to control the temperature and the water in a raised bed. Likewise, in the wintertime, raised beds will be affected more by the cold because you can't insulate them unless you've got this giant heating blanket that's 12 feet long that you can wrap around and whatnot. So that's I think that's a biggie, number one. And actually that's 2 in one, because I'm going to call that 1 and 2. 1, affected by heat and cold. Number 2, dries out more quickly. So let's call that 2 reasons. Number 3, it's harder to be able to put a barrier around it. In other words, like a fence or something like that. Or even if you just want to build up stones and rocks. Some people like to put fences around. Now, you certainly could do something like this 3-foot bed. If I wanted to put a 3-foot fence around it to keep the deer out, well, I'm going to have to put a 6-foot fence because the deer will still come up and eat out of this if I even just have a foot or so. Believe me, they have. I don't know how they do it, but doggone it, they will. They're very persistent. So it's harder to put a border or a fence or anything around it. For instance, my garlic bed, where I have all of my garlic and my onions and whatnot, the only way that I could put a fence around that would be to stake in the holes. But sometimes they're off-centered, so I can't always get the stakes or whatever in the holes. So it's harder to fence something like that. Which, if you don't have deer problems or whatnot, or cats, I have neighborhood cats. They come from, my closest neighbors are 500 feet away, and doggone it, if they don't, their cats sometimes come over, and it's really frustrating. But They love that loose dirt. So anyways, it's harder to fence. Okay, so number 4. You do have to replace the material over time, no matter what it is. Unless, of course, you're using brick, cement blocks and whatnot. Even then, that even creates a bigger challenge with lime leach. I know that's another argument in itself. But in the summertime, when it's 90 degrees outside, those bricks will get seriously hot. They're like rocket hot. And that creates another challenge in itself. So if you're using wood, you're going to have to, over a period of time, you're going to have to replace them. Okay, so number 5, and this to me is a real biggie. They are not for permanent plants, in my opinion. The reason being is because most of the time, people, me included, fill their beds with compost. What compost does over a period of time, it settles and it sinks. So if you're going to have something permanent in there, for instance grapes, it's going to just keep settling and settling, and it's going to take the plants down with it. The plants won't stay there, and then the soil settle, and then you have to add more. When it settles down, it will take the plants down with it. So you're going to have to keep amending, keep adding over a period of time. That would be kind of a number 5 in itself too, because the challenge of replenishing it, and also the challenge of it also settling and you having to replenish it. That's a real big one. So if you're going to be putting some things, like I've seen a lot of people will plant asparagus. We have a neighbor that planted asparagus in some raised beds. And ironically, I'm going to be planting some asparagus in raised beds. But they're not going to be in there permanently. They're only going to be in there for a few years, and then I'm going to move them out. So I've got a video coming up on planting asparagus, so keep an eye out for that. But things that are going to be in there for long term, 10, 12 years, it's just, you're going to have to, I mean, it's a challenge. And so I'm suggesting that you don't do that yet, that you do not put anything in raised beds that are going to be there for long periods of time. Because when that compost settles, so will the plants. For instance, this bed here, this bed, over the course of about 4 years, this is 3 feet high. I lost over a foot of compost. And it just settles. The rain hits it, it goes through, it leaches out, and you've got the compost is just washing out, washing away, and that's just a natural course of events. It's going to happen. So over the course of 4 years, I had to replenish this with a whole foot of compost. And so that's something that you want to consider. That is a big negative as far as raised beds go. So anyways, there are the reasons, pro and con, for and against growing in raised beds. And if anybody else has any pros or cons, post them below. I'd like to hear your comments. But as far as it goes, these are the big ones, the ones that just kind of off of my head when I am in the garden club or people are just coming over and we're just talking gardening. Those are the ones that first come to mind. So if there's some other ones, I'd certainly like to hear them. All right. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. And gardening starting soon, right? Summer's coming, so I hope you guys are ordering your seeds, getting ready, getting fired up and whatnot. I certainly am. I've got my greenhouse starting to grow pretty good. So, yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll catch y'all later.